Aarón Torres saw himself as a king, and his kingdom was the glowing screen of a smartphone, an empire of likes and views built in Culiacan, Sinaloa. He always started his videos with a charismatic smile, asking his online family to help him hit the goal of 1,000 subscribers, a number that symbolized the next step of fame for him. Comment where you're watching from. I want to feel the energy from every corner of the world, he would say, and the flood of comments fueled his insatiable ego. His journey was the personification of the digital dream, a middle-class young man who, with ambition and a photogenic face, won the admiration of thousands. He didn't sell products, he sold a lifestyle, a fantasy of power and freedom that he himself was beginning to believe was real, ignoring the dark price behind every sponsored post. Aaron's life was a collage of excess, meticulously curated for social media. Luxury sports cars whose engines roared like tamed beasts, diamond-encrusted watches that reflected the Sinaloan sun, and exclusive parties in mansions with infinity pools that merged with the horizon. His followers saw only the glitter, the manufactured happiness, in short videos and photos with maximum saturation. What remained outside the frame was the origin of that capital. They didn't see the cold stares of the men who surrounded him, nor the silent tension that hung in the air even in moments of greatest celebration. Each post was a well-told lie, a piece of propaganda that financed his dream while imprisoning him in a dangerous reality with no return. The architect of his rise was a powerful and discreet figure, known in the right circles as El Silencioso. This cartel leader did not see Aarón as a son or a protégé, but as a strategic tool. The young influencer's charisma was the perfect front for laundering money and humanizing the image of a criminal organization, transforming brutality into an aspirational lifestyle. Aarón, in turn, felt like a business partner, a visionary who had found a way to hack the system. He firmly believed he controlled the narrative, that his online fame was an impenetrable shield that would keep him safe from the brutal rules of the world that financed him. This arrogance was his greatest weakness, a silk blindfold that prevented him from seeing the abyss before him. His motivation went far beyond money. What Aarón truly sought was social validation in its purest and most addictive form. He craved the envy in the eyes of his old classmates, the admiration of strangers, the power to influence desires and opinions with a single click. Money was just the fuel for this ego machine. He got involved with the cartel, seeing an opportunity for easy money, a shortcut to the top that would take others years to achieve. He believed himself to be smarter, more astute than the others, capable of navigating the murky waters of organized crime and emerging unscathed, clean, and above all, famous. He saw himself as a master player in a dangerous game, not realizing he was just another disposable piece on the board of someone much more powerful. Sophia, his girlfriend, also an influencer, was the only one who seemed to see the cracks in the golden facade. She loved the luxury, but feared its source. "These new friends of yours, Aarón, they don't smile with their eyes," she warned him one night as they watched a party filled with shadowy figures and armed guards from a balcony. He dismissed her with a kiss on the forehead and a condescending laugh. "You worry too much, my love. They're businessmen, just investors who believe in my potential." Her concern was a dissonant note in his symphony of success, and he systematically ignored it. Sophia represented a connection to the reality he was desperate to abandon, the voice of reason he refused to hear. The cartel's presence in his life was both subtle and omnipresent. At lavish dinners, conversations about transportation logistics and competition problems were masked by a veneer of business normality. Miguel, El Silencioso's right-hand man, often accompanied him, a man of few words and a gaze that seemed to weigh the soul of everyone around. Aarón introduced him as his head of security, and his friends from the digital world accepted the explanation, too dazzled by the glamour to question the shadow. This duality defined his days. In the morning, he recorded upbeat stories about his workout routine. At night, he sat at the table with men whose hands were stained with blood, smiling and toasting to success. He convinced himself that his role was noble, almost artistic. Aarón was not a criminal, he told himself. He was a content creator, an ambassador of a lifestyle. He transformed the cartel's dirty money into clean, desirable images: a trip to Dubai, a yacht in Cabo San Lucas, a generous donation to a local charity, all duly recorded and shared with millions of followers. He was living proof that success in Sinaloa was possible, an inspiration for young people who dreamed of escaping mediocrity. This self-delusion was his defense mechanism, the story he told himself in the mirror to be able to sleep at night, believing he was the master of his own destiny. At the height of his arrogance, feeling untouchable, Aarón began to see his alliance with El Silencioso not as an opportunity, but as a ceiling that limited his growth. He was the star, the talent, and he deserved a bigger piece of the pie. Loyalty, a concept he sold in his motivational captions, became a mere detail in his quest for more power, more fame, more everything. This growing greed blinded him to the fundamental danger of the world he had plunged into, a world where loyalty is not a choice, but a matter of survival, and betrayal is not forgiven with an apology, but paid for with one's own life. The seed of his destruction was already planted, watered by his own ego. The invitation arrived aseptically and modernly, a notification on an encrypted messaging app that Aarón used for his more sensitive business. There were no threats, just a polished and direct text from an unknown contact. "We admire your brand, Mr. Torres. We believe your potential is being underutilized. We would like to propose a partnership that reflects your true value in the market." The message was a balm to his inflamed ego. The word underutilized echoed in his mind, validating the feelings of dissatisfaction he had been nurturing. The proposal was anonymous, dangerous, and incredibly seductive. It was the confirmation he had been waiting for. Other major players had noticed his shine, and now they were offering him a seat at the main table, far from the controlling shadow of El Silencioso. The meeting was set in a luxury restaurant in Mexico City, far from Sinaloa's territory. The intermediary was not a tattooed sicario, but a man in an Italian suit with impeccable manners who spoke of cartels as if discussing a corporate merger. The offer was laid on the table between gourmet dishes, a multi-million-dollar sum, enough for Aarón to found his own empire, to be the boss, not the employee. In return, a single piece of information: the location and date of a crucial meeting El Silencioso would have with his Colombian suppliers. "Think of it as a market acquisition," the man said with a chilling smile. "We simply want to make a better offer to the suppliers. Your part is just to tell us where the meeting will be. Simple, clean." Aarón felt a shiver run down his spine, the first sign of real danger his body had registered in months. The image of El Silencioso, with his sharp silence and gaze that seemed to see through the soul, flashed in his mind. Sophia's words about the men who don't smile with their eyes returned with uncomfortable clarity. For a moment, fear paralyzed him. But then greed, more powerful and addictive than any drug, took over. He envisioned his name in the spotlight, his brand expanding globally, free from any ties. He convinced himself it was a strategic move, not a betrayal. El Silencioso was the past. The future was him, alone at the top. He wasn't betraying a godfather, he was firing a boss. With an almost imperceptible nod, he accepted. The transaction was as cold and impersonal as the proposal. A cryptocurrency wallet was transferred to his control, and the numbers shining on his phone screen felt more real and comforting than any promise of loyalty. That digital code was his letter of liberation. A pulse of adrenaline and power surged through him, a euphoria that erased any trace of guilt or fear. He felt invincible. The master of the universe, the kid from Culiacan who had outsmarted death and the devil. In that moment, in his mind, he was not a traitor. He was a visionary who had just made the boldest move of his life and won the game. Back in the safety of his apartment, Aarón sent the coordinates of the old hacienda on the outskirts of the city, the meeting place. The message was sent and immediately deleted. He felt clean, professional. To celebrate, he opened a bottle of the most expensive champagne and made a toast to his reflection in the mirror. It was a risk, he thought, but to keep growing, to keep sharing the life everyone admired, he had to make a choice, and he chose to be bigger. He felt his journey was just beginning, and that those who supported him should prepare for what was to come, because he promised an unforgettable show. With that thought, he picked up his phone and started recording a new story, his smile brighter than ever. In the first few days after the betrayal, Aarón lived in a state of dangerous euphoria. The rival cartel's money burned in his account, an exciting secret that gave him a new layer of arrogance. He bought a limited edition convertible, not because he needed it, but because he could. He threw the most extravagant party of the season, broadcasting live to his followers, who celebrated his success. With no idea of the deadly bet he had made, he felt like a god of his own creation, moving pieces in a game only he understood, convinced he had executed the perfect plan. Every like, every admiring comment was a confirmation that he was right, that audacity would always be rewarded. The news of the massacre at the hacienda did not come through official channels, but like an underground tremor, a shockwave that spread through Culiacan's underworld. Bodies riddled with bullets, the Colombian. Suppliers eliminated, a multi-million-dollar deal turned into a bloodbath. Aarón heard the details from a contact and felt his stomach churn, a cold nausea rising in his throat. He tried to dissociate, telling himself it was the cost of doing business in that world, that violence was part of the equation and had nothing to do with him. He was just the informant, the facilitator. However, the image of the carnage refused to leave his mind, the first indelible stain on his conscience. The most terrifying detail of the story, however, was a persistent whisper that was confirmed hours later. El Silencioso had escaped. By a hair's breadth, by sheer luck or his legendary caution, the main target had survived the ambush. The news hit Aarón like a punch to the chest, stealing his breath. The man he betrayed, the man whose code of honor was absolute and whose revenge was notorious, was alive. Aaron's shield of invincibility shattered instantly, replaced by a visceral fear. The game was not over. On the contrary, the most dangerous player was still at the table, and now he knew there was a traitor in his midst. His first instinct was to act normal. He picked up his phone to call Miguel, El Silencioso's right-hand man, to offer condolences, to ask if they needed anything, to maintain his facade of a loyal ally. The call went straight to voicemail. He sent a text message expressing his concern. The app showed the message was read, but no reply came. A digital silence set in, cold and absolute. He tried calling other contacts within the organization, but the result was the same, a wall of indifference. Each unanswered call was like a nail being hammered into the coffin of his self-delusion. The isolation became undeniable days later. In a trendy nightclub he used to frequent as a guest of honor. Upon entering, he spotted a group of El Silencioso's men in a VIP booth. Normally they would have greeted him with a nod, perhaps an invitation to join them. That night, their eyes met, and the men simply turned away, their faces like stone masks. The rejection was public, a deliberate act to signal that he was persona non grata. The buzz of the music and conversations around him seemed to fade, and Aarón felt naked and exposed, the heat of shame and fear rising up his neck. The pressure began to show in his work. Maintaining the cheerful, carefree persona online became a daily torture. He recorded videos about positivity and success while his world crumbled around him. His eyes, once bright with ambition, now carried dark circles and a glint of restrained panic. His more attentive followers began to comment, "Are you okay, Aarón? You look tired." Each comment was a small stab to his growing paranoia. He replied with generic excuses about overworking, but the truth was that the facade was becoming too heavy to sustain, and the cracks were beginning to show for all to see. Sophia, who had returned from her trip, noticed the change immediately. His carefree arrogance had been replaced by a nervous anxiety. He jumped at every phone notification and spent hours staring out the window. "Aarón, what's going on?" She confronted him one night, her voice full of genuine concern. "You're not the same. It's about those men, isn't it? Something happened." Blinded by panic, he reacted with fury, accusing her of being dramatic and paranoid. "Leave me alone, Sophia. You don't understand anything about my business." He pushed her away, not out of anger, but out of a desperate desire to keep her out of the crosshairs he felt closing in on him. Then the fear materialized. A black SUV with tinted windows became a constant presence in his rearview mirror. He would see it parked across the street from his gym, or following him at a safe distance on the highway. At first, he tried to convince himself it was a coincidence, a product of his guilty mind. But the vehicle's persistence was methodical and undeniable. It wasn't an aggressive pursuit. It was patient surveillance, a psychological war designed to wear him down, to remind him at every moment that he was being watched, that there was nowhere to run. The city, once his playground, had transformed into an open-air prison. Desperate, he began to plan an escape. He spent a whole night researching flights to Europe, looking for countries without extradition treaties, imagining a new life under a different name. The money he had received for the betrayal was his passport to freedom. However, reality hit him hard. The cartel had tentacles everywhere. Fleeing would be an explicit confession of guilt, and they would hunt him to the ends of the earth, not for the money, but for the example. He was trapped, a prisoner in his own luxury apartment, with millions in the bank that were as useless as ashes. To worsen his torment, he saw his main rival, another Culiacan influencer, post a photo at a private event, smiling alongside Miguel. The same Miguel who wouldn't answer his calls. The image hit him with the force of a secondary betrayal. Had the rival discovered his treachery and reported him out of jealousy, or had the cartel simply replaced him, showing how disposable he was? The competition for likes and followers, which once seemed the most important battle of his life, now revealed itself as child's play in the face of the deadly reality he was in. He was no longer competing for fame. He was fighting for his life. The psychological warfare reached a new level when a delivery man left a small package at his door. Inside, there was no bomb or letter, just a dead canary, its neck broken. No words were necessary. The message was ancient, brutal, and unmistakable. The symbol was a clear warning, a promise that silence was his only, and perhaps temporary, salvation. The terror became physical. He began to have panic attacks, his heart racing in his chest, the air vanishing from his lungs. The luxury around him, the glass walls, the modern art, the designer, furniture, seemed to mock him. Expensive decoration for his impending mausoleum. His sanctuary, social media, became his personal torture chamber. Every notification was a potential call from the executioner. Every comment from a fan asking about his next video felt like a cruel joke. The persona he had built, Aarón Torres, the icon of success, now haunted him. He looked at his old photos, at the easy smile and confident eyes, and saw a stranger, a foolish boy who had sold his soul for digital validation. The online world he had dominated was now just a constant echo of his imminent and violent disconnection from the real world. During a sleepless night, standing on the balcony of his penthouse, he looked down at the lights of Culiacan spread below. The city he had wanted to conquer now seemed like a slumbering beast, ready to devour him. The money, the cars, the followers, it all dissolved in his mind, revealing itself for what it truly was, an illusion. He had risked everything for a fantasy, and was now about to pay with the reality of his own life. It was the first time he felt genuine regret, a terrible clarity about the futility of his ambitions. He understood that in the end, he was completely and utterly alone. It was in this moment of despair that he picked up his phone, not to post a story, but perhaps to record a final testament. He looked at the camera, at his own pale and frightened face, and thought of all he had lost. The truth is, I lost myself, and thought, I made choices I can't undo, and the price is higher than I ever imagined. Sometimes you only understand the value of things when you're about to lose everything. If my journey has taught you anything, let it be this. I thank everyone who believed in me. Your support made me feel important, even if just for a while. The idea of going to the police crossed his mind, a fleeting and naive thought. He knew it was useless. In Sinaloa, the authorities were at best powerless and at worst complicit. Going to them would be like signing his own death warrant, and perhaps his family's. There was no system, no law that could protect him from the power of El Silencioso. He was outside the jurisdiction of civility. In a territory where the rules were written in blood and justice was a matter of private revenge. The loneliness was absolute, a vacuum that consumed all hope. In a final act of love or cowardice, he called Sophia. His voice was a hoarse whisper, devoid of all his usual arrogance. He didn't confess, he couldn't find the words. Instead, he begged her to leave. Go visit your parents in Guadalajara, spend a few weeks there. Please, Sophia, do it for me. The desperation in his voice convinced her more than any explanation. She cried, asked questions he couldn't answer, and finally agreed. Watching her leave his apartment with a suitcase was the hardest thing he had ever done, a silent acknowledgement that his world had become too toxic for anyone he loved. A week later, the doorbell rang. Aarón looked through the peephole and his heart froze. It was Miguel. He wasn't with his henchmen. He was alone, dressed casually. The normality of the scene was what made it so terrifying. Aarón opened the door, his hands shaking. Miguel smiled, a thin, cold smile. Aarón, good to see you. The boss wants to talk to you. We need to discuss some new content strategies planned for the next quarter. The proposal was so absurd, so surreal, that Aarón could only nod in silence. The time had come. He got into the black SUV that had been haunting him for weeks. Miguel sat behind the wheel, and another silent man was in the passenger seat. No weapons were shown, no threatening words were spoken. The door closed with a click that sounded like the seal of a tomb. The atmosphere inside the car was thick, the silence heavy with the weight of the unsaid. Aarón looked out the window as the car pulled away from his luxurious building, the symbol of everything he had achieved and everything he was about to lose. Every meter traveled was a step away from his life and a step closer to his fate. During the drive, his life flashed before his eyes, not as a dramatic film, but in fragments of arrogance. He remembered laughing at Sophia's concerns, feeling superior to his sponsors, believing his intelligence placed him above the rules. Each memory was a small stab of regret. He had had so many chances to turn back, so many red flags he chose to ignore, dazzled by the shine of his own manufactured image. Now, the reflection he saw in the dark glass of the window was that of a condemned fool. He thought of Sophia. He pictured her face, her smile, the way she touched his arm when she was worried. He had pushed her away to protect her, but the truth was, he had used her too. She was part of his brand, the perfect accessory for his influencer life. The love he felt for her was real, but it was tainted by his selfishness. The hope that she was safe was the only comfort he had left, a small point of light in the overwhelming darkness of his despair. He closed his eyes, praying she would never know the full truth of his fall. As the SUV drove on, the urban landscape of Culiacan began to give way to a more arid and desolate scenery. Buildings and lights were replaced by dirt roads and sparse cacti. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red, a cruel beauty that seemed to mock the ugliness of his fate. The change in landscape mirrored his own journey, from the vibrant, superficial life in the city to the silent, deadly void of the desert. Each kilometer was another layer of his old identity being stripped away. He looked at Miguel, who drove with an unperturbed calm, his eyes focused on the road. There was no anger on his face, no pleasure, just a professional efficiency. Miguel was the personification of the system Aarón thought he could outsmart. He was an enforcer, a cog in the machine, and Aarón was simply a task to be completed. This impersonality was more terrifying than any scream or threat. To them, his life was not a tragedy. It was just a problem to be solved, a loose end to be tied up. Aarón instinctively reached for his phone, the gesture of an addict looking for his fix. He opened his profile one last time. He saw his last post, a photo of him smiling in the new convertible. There were thousands of likes and hundreds of comments. Idle, living the dream, take me with you. The words of adulation were like salt in his wounds. They didn't love him. They loved the lie he had created, a lie that was now about to be buried forever, far from the cameras and the applause. The car slowed down and turned off the dirt road, entering a remote area where nothing grew but dry scrub and dust. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of the engine. Aarón could hear the frantic beat of his own heart. This was the place, the end of the line, the fear he had been feeling for the past. Few weeks transformed into something different, a cold resignation. The fight was over. He was no longer a king, an influencer, or a star. He was just a man about to face the consequences of his choices. Miguel turned off the engine. The silence that followed was absolute, the silence of the desert, the silence of death. For a long moment, no one moved. Aarón looked ahead and saw another car parked, and next to it, a lone figure waiting. Even from a distance, he recognized the silhouette. It was El Silencioso. He hadn't just come to order the execution, he had come to watch. Aaron's offense had not just been a business deal gone wrong, it had been personal, and the punishment would be too. The door next to Aarón opened. The man in the passenger seat nodded, a silent order for him to get out. Aarón complied, his legs weak and trembling. The desert air was cold and dry, and it smelled of dust and finality. He took his last steps as a free man, walking toward the figure who awaited him, the architect of his rise and the master of his fall. The facade had completely crumbled. All that was left was Aarón Torres, the traitor, walking to his final judgment. Aarón was dragged until he stood before El Silencioso. Twilight bled across the horizon, and the headlights of the two SUVs cut through the growing darkness, creating a makeshift stage in the middle of nowhere. El Silencioso did not look like a monster, but like a disappointed businessman. His expression was not of anger, but of a chilling, professorial calm, which made the situation infinitely more terrifying. He looked at Aarón not with hatred, but with a kind of clinical contempt, like a scientist observing a failed specimen. The silence that stretched between them was an entity of its own, a vacuum that amplified the sound of Aaron's heart hammering against his ribs, a drum announcing his own execution. Finally, El Silencioso's voice cut through the silence, low and devoid of emotion. In this world, Aarón, loyalty isn't a quality. It's the only currency that has value. Money comes and goes, power changes hands. But one's word, trust, that is everything. He took a step forward, his face now illuminated by the ghostly light of the headlights. You didn't betray me for money. You betrayed me because you believed that your fame, your followers, this illusion you built, made you bigger than the rules. Your mistake was not greed, it was arrogance. And the punishment for that cannot be a bullet. A bullet is too quick. People forget. Your punishment is to be forgotten." The word forgotten broke Aaron's spine. His entire identity, everything he had worked for, was to be seen, to be remembered. The annihilation of his legacy was a terror greater than death. He collapsed to his knees, his control finally breaking in convulsive sobs. "Please," he choked out, his voice unrecognizable. "The money, I'll give it all back. Double. I'll work for free forever. I'll do anything, anything you say. Please, don't erase me, kill me, shoot me, but don't do this." It was the desperate babbling of a man watching his personal universe disintegrate, the pathetic plea of a digital celebrity begging not to be disconnected. El Silencioso watched Aaron's breakdown with unchanging indifference, as if watching a poorly acted scene. He did not respond to the offers, gave no sign that he even heard them. Aaron's humiliation was simply the final stage of the process, the confirmation of his absolute power. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he simply turned his back on the man, crumbling at his feet. With a minimal gesture, an almost imperceptible nod of his head towards Miguel, the sentence was confirmed. That subtle, drama-free movement was the most violent act of all, sealing Aaron's fate with a terrible, silent finality. Miguel and the other man grabbed Aaron by the arms, lifting him from the ground. He struggled, but his strength was gone, consumed by terror. They dragged him a few meters, toward a dark patch on the ground he hadn't noticed before. A shallow grave, an imperfect rectangle hastily dug into the desert floor. The sight of the open hole, waiting for him like a hungry mouth, ripped a scream from Aaron, a sharp animal sound that tore through the night air. It was a scream of denial, of primal horror, the sound of a man confronting the literal brutality of his end. Without any ceremony, they pushed him into the pit. He fell on his back, the impact knocking the little air he had left out of him. For a second he lay there, looking up at the sky, which was now a deep indigo velvet, sprinkled with the first stars. He saw the silhouettes of Miguel and the other man position themselves at the edges of the grave, each holding a shovel. Then the first mound of dirt was thrown. It hit his chest with a dull, dry thud. The physical shock made him gag. Dirt got in his mouth, scratched his eyes. The smell of dust and decay filled his nostrils. The abstract horror became an unbearable sensory reality. Death was not a concept, it was the weight of the earth on his body. The shovels began to move at a steady, merciless rhythm. More earth fell, covering his legs, his stomach. The weight immobilized him, a crushing pressure that stole his movement. His panicked screams became muffled, filtered by the growing layer of soil. He tried to squirm, to fight, but it was useless. Darkness began to envelop him, the opening of light above him growing smaller and smaller. His last glimpse of the world was a fragment of starry sky, an indifferent beauty witnessing his anonymous end. Then the darkness was total, and the only sounds were the thud of the earth and the roaring of his own blood in his ears, before the final silence consumed him. The sun rose over the Sinaloan desert, painting the sky with soft colors that belied the brutality of the previous night. Where the two SUVs had been parked, there was nothing but tire tracks that the morning wind was already beginning to erase. The only evidence of Aaron's fate was a discreet mound of disturbed earth, an almost imperceptible scar on the arid landscape. There was no cross, no name, not even a stone to mark the spot. It was an anonymous grave, designed to be forgotten, to merge back into the earth. El Silencioso had kept his promise. The existence of Aarón Torres, the digital influencer, had been permanently deleted from the physical world. His death, as silent and invisible as the life he pretended to, was loud and overexposed. While his body rested beneath the soil, his digital ghost remained more alive than ever. On his Instagram profile, the last photo of the convertible was accumulating comments. Initial admiration gave way to confusion. "Aaron, you've disappeared," said one. "When's the next video? We miss you," asked another. Thousands of fans, his online family, began to speculate. Theories arose. He was on a digital detox, planning a triumphant comeback, or perhaps on a secret trip. The irony was overwhelming. The man who lived for public attention had his absence turned into his last piece of viral content, a mystery his followers debated passionately, never coming close to the terrible, silent truth. Far from Culiacan, in a cafe in Guadalajara, Sofia stared at her phone screen, at the long list of missed calls and unread messages. A cold premonition took hold of her, the certainty that Aaron's silence was not a choice. She was perhaps the only person in the world whose grief was real, though she did not yet know she was grieving. In Sinaloa, the vacuum left by Aaron was already being filled. His rival was posting videos of even more expensive cars and more extravagant parties, claiming the vacant crown. The ruthless and hungry digital ecosystem simply moved on, proving that El Silencioso's promise of oblivion was the most accurate of sentences. The tragedy of Aarón Torres was not his death, but the futility of his life. He built an empire on the quicksand of vanity, financed by a brutality he chose to ignore. He believed he could control the darkness, use it to fuel his light, without understanding that darkness always consumes. In the end, he was not defeated by a cartel or an enemy, but by his own image in the mirror, by the insatiable persona he created, and which demanded a sacrifice he could not pay. His story became a cautionary tale, a dark whisper about the danger of falling in love with a lie, especially when that lie is yourself. Accounts like Aaron's, about the collision between appearance and reality, are often lost in the noise of our time. They serve as a chilling reminder that the consequences of our choices are real and sometimes permanent. If this tragic journey resonated with you, if his story served as a warning, I ask you to consider subscribing. It is your support that allows me to continue giving a voice to these complex and necessary narratives, ensuring that the lessons learned in the darkness can somehow find the light. I'm deeply grateful that you have followed along to the end. Stay safe.